How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be building this black, shiny, round, circular, and believe it or not, somewhat budget-friendly tabletop. So let's get into the shop and get to it. First off, why plywood and not actual hardwood? Well, this piece of plywood costs $90, and since I'm wanting to make this an 1.5 inches thick, I'd have to buy 8/4 red oak, and in my area, it goes from around $5 to $7 a board foot for 8/4 red oak. And so this circle is going to be 54 inches in diameter. So if you do the math, it works out to about exactly 32 board foot. You want to get some extra, so let's just say you buy 45 board feet. Okay, so actually I figured it for 4/4 material. So this is top's 1.5 inches thick. I'd have to get 8/4. So instead of 30 board feet, it's actually 60 board feet. So you'd probably want to get around 75 board feet. So it's actually more expensive than I thought in the video. Further proving my point that this is going to be a lot cheaper. That's well over $250, I believe. Yeah, $270, $250, $270. So this piece of plywood is $90 plus some edge banding. We're going to buy 2-inch thick edge banding, which is about $15, $20. So we're in at about $100, $110 for this big top. Whereas if we were to do it out of hardwood, it would be a lot more expensive and also a lot more time consuming as well. So let's now actually jump into it. You may be asking, how are we going to make a circle that is wider than 4 feet in diameter when the plywood is only 4 feet wide this way? Well, we're going to make 2 half circles and join them together in the middle. I do need a section of this plywood for another project, about 13 inches of it. So we're going to go ahead and rip off 13 inches of this, and then we will lay out our circles, half circles, and you'll see that in a minute here. So since our circle is 54 inches in diameter, 4.5 feet, that's 4.5 feet, right? 48, yeah, 54 inches. We need 2 half circles with a radius 27 inches, so half of the diameter of that circle. So what we're actually going to do is attach a block to the sides here, so we can drill our center pivot point for our router, and also for our tracing, to trace out 2 half circles, one off of this edge down here, and one off of this edge up here. So now we've got a place to drill a hole to have a pivot point. We do the same thing on the other side. Now that we have these pieces attached, we can go ahead and drill a hole for our center points and get things traced out. So I've got a router jig. So this jig I have, super fancy. It took me about 4 hours to make. Here it is. No, it's just a piece of wood, MDF. All you do, mount your router on one end, put a hole or something through it for your bit, and a pivot point on the other end. And that's literally all you got to do. And one thing that's good to do is take a drill bit, smooth a regular shank drill bit, and drill your hole. The reason I was saying use a smooth shank drill bit to drill your hole for your pivot point. That way you can also use the drill bit as the pivot point itself. So we'll set this up to be 27 inches from the pivot point to the router. Drop this in, and I'll be able to spin. But the first thing I'm going to do is trace out the circle roughly with my tape measure and rough cut it with the jigsaw, and then we'll come back and cut it with the router. So as I'm cutting this, I'm realizing, especially close to the edge, this veneer is peeling. So that's no bueno. Alright, so scratch that. We're going to try something different. what we're going to do, instead of rough cutting this out with the jigsaw, because it is lifting up that first ply pretty bad, I am going to, we can move this circle over about probably a ½ inch or so. That'll get us out of that tear out that we have here. And then I'm going to do a shallow pass with the router, come back with the jigsaw, and then come back with the router to finish it up. So let's do that. Well, this is frustrating and disappointing. So I'm doing the shallowest pass you could possibly do with this router, and this is just absolutely tearing apart. I feel kind of stupid. The reason why we're having so much issues there was, well, number one, the plywood wasn't that great, but after rough cutting with the jigsaw and realizing that wasn't going to work and switching to the router, I was using an upcut bit. So that pulls the material up as you're cutting, and if you're cutting on plywood like this, it's probably going to cause tear up. So I should have been using a straight bit or a down cut bit, and I bet you we wouldn't have experienced the same issues. Regardless, we still have to do a shallow pass with the router because the plywood wasn't that great to begin with. But just, yeah. Anyways, all that to say, we eventually did a shallow pass with the router, jigsawed, and then finished it up with the router. So if you're going to do this, just make sure you're using a straight bit or even a down cut bit for a better result. So we've got the circle together. Now, one edge was a factory edge of the plywood. We probably should have addressed that before we went making the circle. So this center joint here doesn't look as perfect as I want it to. So what I'm going to do, could run these two halves along the joiner. If you don't have a joiner, you could use a table saw, screw a board to the bottom offset of this, run it to get a clean straight edge. What I'm just going to do, since I got it, is clamp this to the table so that this cannot move. Put my track saw on here, run the kerf, run a cut through here, and the kerf it leaves behind will leave two nice edges that we'll be able to mate together. Alright, so we got the circle cut out. Now we need to join the two halves together and then add thickness to it for the edge banding. Now I was saving this fall off for another project, but I'm just gonna have to go buy another piece because I'm gonna need, I thought I had a bunch of scrap 3/4 material laying around, turns out I don't. So I'm going to need some scrap 3/4 material to thicken this top up around. But first things first, let's get this attached, the two halves attached together. I'm going to have some kind of runners on the underside that will screw and draw everything together. We'll glue that up, pocket hole it, and use those runners. So, ooh, Alright, so we got to flip back over, and now we need to add around the circumference of the circle more plywood strips. Now, you can find a calculator anywhere online that will help you with figuring out how to cut a giant polygon that will fit within the circle. So here this is the calculator here. So you see at the top we got the segments, amount of segments, the outside ring diameter, and the ring thickness. Now that doesn't so much matter for this. That's just going to tell us kind of how much waste. You could visualize here how much will be left over. So I think if we go with an 1.5 inch ring, it'll give us plenty of meat left over and plenty of wiggle room to work with. So that is the giant segment we'll be making. And down here, it shows you all the pieces we need to cut. So we need to cut 10 of these pieces, 17 and 15/16 long, with an 18-degree cut on each end of the board. And the board needs to be 3 and a 32nd of an inch wide. We'll just go with 3 inches. All we got to do now is make 10 of those pieces. Alright, now over at the miter saw, we're going to set this to 18 degrees. We'll make our mark, we'll set up a stop block, and chop all these out. So you're going to keep your saw set at this angle, so that you'll make your first cut. Then you need to flip it, so you have a long to long, and put it up against your stop block. Alright. Now we need to make this into, now we need to connect them all, just like this. I'm just going to put one pocket screw on the end of every one, and then we'll just screw it to the other one. I think that'll be the easiest way to go about this. Yeah, this is definitely too big. So, silly me, I didn't look at those calculations correctly, and I made an error. So we've got to just basically make each one of these shorter, better than having to make them longer, because then we just have to make them again. But we need to trim a little off of each one of these, and then reattach it. Should be closer to the circle that we need. So I'm going to do that off camera, because it's basically just the same thing. But if you're doing this, do the math correctly. Otherwise, you might have to do it twice. So we got the circle back together, and I have gone around the circle with my tape measure and kind of scribed a rough line, just so I know roughly where to place a circle to be kind of even all around. So we're going to glue all around this and set it on, shoot it on, and then we'll trim it up with the circle. Alright, now that we've got the excess trimmed off, we're going to come with a flush trim bit and cut off all the rest. So we've got our circular top from 3/4 plywood made double thick. Now we're going to apply our edge banding. This is 2-inch wide pre-glued red oak edge banding, and so we've got an iron here to heat it up. Straight. And apply it around. So I'm not going to cut it to length. I'm going to work my way around till I get to closer to the end, and then we will kind of work our way to that point and be able to cut it. The nice thing about the iron-on is you can kind of work your way around, and like I said, leave the end bit and it won't be sticking to itself like if you did an adhesive backed edge banding. So I'm going to put some blocks underneath this just so we can rotate, just so we can move the piece around and not worry about snagging the edge banding on anything. So I kind of heat it up to where it's just hot enough to where you can't touch it. I'm going to really work the iron back and forth so we make sure we fully heat up, fully melt the glue. That way it can cure back on and give us a nice bond. And one thing you want to make sure to do is to keep this basically parallel with the top of whatever your edge banding. Because if you start to get off and you get below, you're going to have to work it back out, and then you're going to have, that's how you can get bubbles to build up. So you want to really do your best to keep things parallel. So I'm going with about 3/8 of an inch overhang here, 1/4 of an inch around there, and slowly working that around. Okay, so what we're going to do here to get this cut, we are going to grab a square and a sharp chisel or a knife would do. Go with the sharp chisel. Basically, I'm going to overlap this and use the square as a straight edge and just cut along that joint. And then when we glue it together, it will be good. We'll be able to join that together just like that. So this veneer is actually quite thin, and what we can do instead of getting our router out and flush trimmings, kind of just go along the edge. I'm actually going to use this burnishing tool. This will be good. We could kind of just go along the edge, and it will basically kind of break itself as we work our way around. And then we'll just be able to peel it off like that, and then we'll come back with the sander. Alright. The one thing I will say about sanding is be sure to really break the edge here. And what I mean by that is go with the sanding block and really sand down this edge. That way you won't be catching your veneer. Even after you have your finish on it, you don't want a tiny sliver to be kind of exposed there. So you want to really roll that edge so nothing will ever get caught. Alright, so we got this bad boy sanded. I've got it on just a little furniture dolly, so that way we can spin and work on it. And now it's time to turn this thing black. We're going to be using some India ink to stain this black. Why this over a traditional stain? I wanted to try something different. I've seen a lot of people use this online, and this stuff's supposed to get you a darker color than even regular wood stain. And this is a water-based ink, not an oil-based stain, so doesn't have all the VOCs that an oil-based stain would be. Not as smelly, easier to work with, I think. And I did it on a test sample, and it looked great. So we are going to turn this thing black. So I just kind of sprayed it on and spread it out. Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is looking nice already. It looks pretty good, I will say. I was a little worried kind of towards the end there, but now that it's all kind of, the wet look has gone away, so it doesn't look as dark as it did when you're first applying it on and it's really wet. It looks a little darker. But I think once we get our clear coat put onto here, it will give it more of that wet look, because I think I'm going to do a satin, maybe a semi-gloss on this, but I think it will give it more of that wet look that I'm kind of going for. But I ultimately also do think that I probably may, in a few minutes here, do another coat and just see where that goes. Because this stuff, I mean, you put more on and it might darken it up a little bit, it might not. But we'll see here. I think we'll do one more coat. The good thing with this is I don't think another coat is going to hurt it. Whereas there's times where, especially at my other job, we've wanted to stain things darker, so it was suggested to apply another coat of stain. Now, especially if the stain is not fully dried, you could end up pulling the stain back off with like oil-based stains and stuff. I don't think that's going to be the case with this because it is this water-based ink. So I think we'll be all right, but let's see what happens. We got a whole bottle of this stuff, so we got plenty. I'll let that dry for a few minutes and we'll see how it looks. But I'd much rather use something like this to color wood over a oil-based stain, because oil-based stains, they just smell. You need a lot of ventilation. They take a while to dry too, and they're just not fun to work with. So that's kind of hesitant to go the staining route. And this dye, I think will be, oh great, I just touched my ear with that. Hopefully it's not black. I think we'll be good with this dye. Let's see how it goes. We're now going to spray some water-based polyurethane onto this, and we'll do about 3 to 4 coats, depending on how it looks. I'm hoping all this goes smoothly, but we shall see. All right, we're 2 coats into the clear, and things are looking pretty good. The color definitely has deepened back to that wet black look when we first put the India ink on. So if you're doing the India ink and it's dried and it doesn't look quite as dark as you think it should or you want it to, once you get your clear coat on there, it will darken up a bit back to that wet look that it had. So now we are going to sand this with some, I'm going to take it off of the little card I had it on, and we're going to sand with some 400 grit and spray a couple of more coats. On pieces that you've put any sort of stain on, you definitely want to build up some coats before you go to sanding, just because you don't want to burn through your finish and sand the stain. Another coat in there. So I used this Bear water-based polyurethane. Get it at Home Depot. I went with Home Depot has two options. I think it's Varathane and Behr. The Behr had an hour recoat time, which is pretty fast for polyurethane. I remember, like oil-based, I think you need 2 to 4 hours, depending. So this stuff dried pretty quick. The first coat I think took the longest to dry, and then we did the second coat, sanded with 400 grit, did a third coat, and it was dry to the touch, and probably, it probably took a little more than an hour, hour 15, hour 30, but you could definitely coat a full project in a day with this stuff, with the hour dry time. And then the sprayer I used is this Graco airless sprayer, and I used the 308 tip on there. The fine finish low pressure green tips is what I used. Gotta go clean the gun out now. Gotta say, I'm pleased with the results. I think it turned out well. So yeah, that is how you make a pretty simple but elegant, beautiful, shiny, black, thick circle top for any tabletop you might need relatively easily, assuming you have some of the tools that we need. Tools you'd need: table saw, again, a router, and a jigsaw. You could sand everything by hand. You don't need a sander, but a sander helps. And you could brush on the finish or do a wipe-on poly. If you did a wipe-on poly, I'd probably let the India ink sit for even longer, like a week. Because anytime you use a wipe-on poly with stain, you want to make sure that stain is fully dried. Because if it is not, wiping it on definitely can pull off some of the finish. But hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I would love to answer them. Let me know what you think of the project. I know this gloss look is a bit of a polarizing look, as is anything these days. People love things, people hate things, but let me know if you love it or hate it down in the comments. And I appreciate you all so much for watching. Subscribe if you're not already, leave a like, and yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.